Welcome to A Drop of Silence, the groundbreaking podcast series that dives deep into the realms of controversy. Join us as we bring special guests who share their extraordinary experiences and offer unparalleled insight into history, today's news headlines, and the future. Get ready to embark on a thought-provoking journey where silence speaks volumes and the truth lies somewhere beneath the surface.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
Shalom, everybody. I'm Pam Goldstein, and I'm the host of A Drop of Silence podcast series. This week, we have the fabulous Elizabeth Schwartz as our guest. I adore Elizabeth. She's probably one of the greatest human beings I've ever met, her and her husband, Yale Strom. But if you're from Detroit, you probably know him as Yale Strom because we have a tendency to screw up names, but it's Yale Strom. Together, they're in a klezmer band called the Hot Pstromis. That group and Yale and Elizabeth have literally brought klezmer to a new height of enjoyment in today's society, which is a hard thing to do considering it's a language that's very rarely spoken anymore. She is with Yale in Detroit on August the 25th at 3 p.m. and it's called Hallelujah's in the House. For more information, you can look up Yale Strom or Elizabeth Schwartz and you'll find the information there, but it's going to be an amazing experience. I'm excited about it. Elizabeth, today we're going to talk about a lot of things, but one of the things we're going to talk about is how she took myths, Yiddish myths that were talked about in World War II, and turned them into a kind of a scientific horror story. And oh my God, they are so well written and they are so good. And the book is in both Yiddish and English. I hope you enjoy her as much as I did talking to her. Shalom, everybody, and welcome to A Drop of Silence. I'm Pam Goldstein, your host of this podcast series. And with me today is one of my favorite people, Elizabeth Schwartz. She is known as the Edith Piaf of Yiddish, and she is the lead vocalist in the Yale Strom and Hot Pstromi klezmer band. Now, for the local people, it's Yale Strom, but for international people, it's Yale Strom. That's all I can say. So welcome, Elizabeth. And I'm so happy to have you on the show. I'm so excited. Let's talk about, first of all, how you became interested in music and the arts, because you're such an avid participant in it.
Oh, well, thank you. I think you'll understand soon why I feel such profound gratitude to be doing what I'm doing and to be able to focus on it. I was a performer, a trained singer, trained actor, very, very, very seriously. And then I got to a point where my family sort of said, you know, you can't do this seriously. We come from, a family of lawyers and doctors and professors, so you have to get a job. At which point I decided if I couldn't be in the front of the camera, I would be behind the camera. And I went out to LA and worked my way up from a production secretary to a president of production. And so I was a film executive in Hollywood, and I completely gave up singing. Showers don't count. And turned my back on artistic expression outside of the dramaturgy I did as part of my job, because it was really, it was a very painful transition to give that up. When I met Yale, I had been out in LA for over a decade, and I was so drawn to not only the body of his work, but how he expressed this area of research and interest. And we went out to a party one day. He'd moved out to LA to live with me, and we were at a party, and there was a Broadway pianist there, and someone said, "Oh, I love this old Noel Coward song. If only there was someone here who could sing it." And I, at that point, had a little bit of wine, a lot of bit of wine. And I said, "Oh, I know that song." And I sat down at the piano with this accompanist, and I ended up singing for a couple of hours. And Yale was shocked into silence. If you know Yale, and thank you, it is Strom. If you know Yale, you know that he's seldom at a loss for words, but he was so, I think, surprised that he had never heard me sing, and that when he did hear me sing, that I really could sing. At which point he said, "You know, you're joining the band." And I said, "Don't be ridiculous. I don't know anything about Yiddishkeit. I don't know much Yiddish." And he said, "I can teach you that. What I can't teach you is how to sing like you sing." And I joked at the time. I really tried to get out of it. I joked that I was like the reverse Lucy Ricardo trying to get out of the band, out of my husband's act. But as he is about so many things, he was right. And that's what really kind of got me back into it. And it was a very tentative re-entry, because it had been so emotionally loaded to give it up. But I'm glad that happened. And there's been quite a few years since that time.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard you, I was totally blown away. There's this tiny petite woman, and this powerhouse of a voice came out of you, and I went, "Whoa, where did that come from? She doesn't have enough room in there for that voice."
Well, thank you. And thank you for calling me petite.
No, you are. You're tiny compared. Yeah, I'm just like, you are. She's tiny and petite, guys. She's really gorgeous. So, of all the things you've done with Yale and the Hot Pstromis, what is your? I mean, you've done a lot of recordings. I think I own. I forget how many CDs of yours I own. What's your favorite aspect of it?
Well, I approach all of it with a healthy dose of dread. I suffer from terrible stage fright. So, it's been many, many years, but that's my big secret, not secret, is that it's always something that I go into assuming that I can't do it. And Yale knows my pattern, which is we finish the recording, I hear it for the first time, and I say, "Oh my God, that was horrible." And he doesn't react, because he knows I'm going to listen to the second time and go, "Huh, that's pretty good." So I think my favorite aspect of it is not the literal doing of it or having done it. It's the reason for doing it. I didn't mention when I met Yale and he slowly converted me into becoming a Jewish artist of Jewish art, that I really felt that I could make a contribution to a vanishing little known world that I'm always trying to promote in any way I can. And I felt of service.
Yeah, I love klezmer music, and I love, what is the other part of that? Finjan? that's similar to klezmer. I love all of that music, but I mentioned, in fact, I mentioned it in a book I wrote, and in my writers group, a Jewish woman who's 75 said, "Well, I've never heard of klezmer music." And I go, "Whoa, that's such a huge part of our culture." Can you briefly describe where klezmer music came from and why it is so big to Jewish people?
I'll try and give you the haiku version.
Yeah, it's true.
First of all, what all Jewish music has in common is our scales and our modes, as we call them. And these come from the Middle East. So if you have an emotional reaction when you hear something, it's because there is something so elemental about it. And klezmer is a compound word. It's from the Hebrew clay, kelim, and zemer, tools of the melody, literally, which became klezmer. And it's really a European art form. So if there are people from other Jewish cultures, they may not have grown up hearing it. And, my family was certainly of European extraction, and I didn't grow up hearing it. In fact, I was such a blank slate when I met Yale, that it was a great learning curve when I started to get to know him and get to know the breadth of his work.
Mm-hmm.
But it is really, there's so much of an umbrella term to the word klezmer. It really, once you start to really look into it, there's such a variety and such a huge field that it's really almost like saying jazz, and understanding that there's bebop and there's Dixieland, and they just fall under this general umbrella term. But that's, if I had to kind of condense that, I would say that it is European Jewish music based in these Middle Eastern modalities that is sort of the soundtrack of a people.
Wow. That's a good explanation. I'm very proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
Because I've tried to explain klezmer music to people, and I go, well, I really don't know how to describe it, because it's so complex and it's so amazing. There's a role for it still, don't you think, in the world? But I still think it's very important that people hear it and understand it. Do you agree?
Well, I hope there's a role for it, and that's sort of what I'm doing, and many other wonderful musicians around the world. But really, there was a revival in the United States in the 1970s, around then, of people sort of going back and discovering this roots music and promoting it, and that's helped to spur other countries and other people to look into it, and it no longer has that patina of counterculturalism that it did back then.
Yeah.
But it is a beautiful, vibrant art form, and I think there's how should I put this? There's a lot of historical recordings that we have now from way before the 1970s, old 78s, that a lot of the revivalists listened to and learned from. And I do feel with most folk musics that it's very important to stay rooted in the history of it, but it's also important, and it's a hallmark of what we try and do, to keep exploring and pushing it forward and keeping breath moving through it. So it's not just like a little prehistoric insect encased in amber. It's a living, breathing art form. And in that sense, for me, it's a proxy for our people who I want to keep living, breathing, and moving forward into the future.
Good answer. You're good at this. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is your all-time favorite song that you've recorded or sung that's klezmer?
Well, I can't hurt any song's feelings, but I also can't answer that honestly, because everything changes, and I'll make a new recording and then I'll say, God, I love that song. And so I'm always thinking first and foremost about what I just did. I really, really, really love the title track from the last album, The Wolf and the Lamb, which was not the name of the song. In fact, it wasn't a song. It was a poem that Yale found from a region of that borders Austria and Czech Republic called the Burgenland. And the Yiddish dialect from that region is extinct. No one speaks it anymore. So it was also a nice feeling to say, well, let me just set this down now. And if people want to know what it was like, they can listen to this song and hear these subtle dialectical changes. But I love the melody that Yale composed, which he was really channeling these French Impressionist composers like Eric Satie. So it has a really beautiful chord structure. Tell me if I get too technical and in the weeds about this.
Yeah.
But I liked how the interpretation of the original poem, as we interpreted it today, it's really very, very metaphorical about the secularization and modernity of Judaism, and whether it's going to stay rooted in the historical Orthodox tradition or whether it's going to move forward. And there's a tension in that whole conversation. And we like to think that that's where our music sits, right in that spot between deep tradition and exploration. And I like to think that that's where we are all the time, not just when we're recording music.
Yeah, yeah. Moving on to the other talented part of you, which is writing. You've co-created the award-winning audio dramas, The Witches of Lublin and Debs in Canton. How does things like that come about? How did you get interested in writing those kinds of stories? And then we'll get into the new book, which is really scary.
Well, it's actually, everything's sort of, sometimes you just stumble into these moments. We have some very close friends who were moving to New York from Boston, one of whom is the wonderful writer Ellen Kushner, who, as a novelist, really created this genre called manor punk.
Yeah.
And had a wonderful show in Boston for many years called Sound and Spirit, where she'd play music and she'd write and she'd narrate, and she's an amazing radio voice. And so unfortunately, though, they were moving to New York as we were leaving New York. So every once in a while, we'd go down to their apartment and gather their empty boxes so we could take them home and use them to pack up our stuff. And Ellen said, we should work on something together. We were standing in the lobby, and Yale said, oh, you know what? I've never worked in radio, aside from, let me just interject here, that he did write the music for the NPR series, Fiddlers, Philosophers, and Fools. It was Jewish short stories, and he wrote the music for it. But he said, I've never worked in radio. And I said, well, I really want to work on something that's woman-centric. And Ellen said, yeah, but let's do it sort of let's make it sort of use this world that you guys are coming from. And I said, well, Yale had this research in the book of klezmer about this very rare instance of women performing in public at marketplaces. So then we were off and we created this whole magical realism story about set in the 18th century in Lublin, Poland, about women klezmers and what it was like, the whole social hierarchy. But we gave it a dose of magic and worked on this together for many years. It was a great writing process, especially as we were emailing back and forth across the coasts. And Yale and I were doing music for a production, a reading in LA, and the actress Tova Feldshuh was playing the lead.
Oh, I love her.
And I asked her if she would read it. And she said, yeah, I'll read anything that you guys wrote. I'll read. And I said, well, if you like it, will you be in it? And she said, if I like it, I'll do it. And so she played the lead. So she did like it. And it turned into a wonderful production produced by Sue Media in New York. Sue Zizza, the director producer, and her partner David Shin, amazing golden-eared recording engineer. And so that was our first experience with audio drama in that whole genre. And it's a wonderful project. It's it's set during Passover, so it's always a great annual listen on audio book. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And so then Sue came back to us and said, I love the documentary American Socialist, The Life and Times of Eugene Victor Debs. And I said, well, we can write an audio drama, but I really have to dramatize it because it needs to have an emotional arc and you need to really care about this. So I said it in the days leading up to Debs's giving his speech in Canton against World War I, for which he was convicted of sedition and went to federal prison, but also knowing that this could happen and coming to the moral conclusion that he had to do that. So that was the second thing I worked on with Sue. And then after this book came out, Sue said, I want to do kind of an illustrated audiobook podcast where I would read the stories in English and a wonderful actress friend of mine would read them in Yiddish, and they'll be illustrated with music and sound. And that's coming out in October.
Wow. Wow. Now you also have a book that you sent me, and the title is
The Sweet Fragrance of Life and Other Horror Stories. That's the book that we're making into the podcast.
Yeah. But see, it's that one little word that she slips in, the horror stories. And I was so stunned. I was like, oh my God, these are terrifying. How did that come about? That's your imagination, right?
Yes. The deep, dark recesses of my imagination. I really feel as an artist in multiple fields, that what I'm most interested in is this story of our culture, and I'll find as many avenues as I can to tell it. These were stories. One day I just started thinking about putting them to paper. They're all based in this world of Central Eastern European, really, Jewish culture. One is before the wars, even the first one. The second one is during the war or in the interwar period, I should say. And then the third is during World War II.
Yeah, that one's brutal. It's the third
But as someone who's really delved into this world. And of course, you can't research this world without familiarizing yourself very well with the history of what life was like there, not just during the historical events, but all the time. And I found very few of these stories told from a woman's point of view. Not that the characters are always female. In the first story, they're not. But really how life could have been doubly hard if you were a Jew, but you were also a woman and had to deal with all the things that women have to deal with, including being silenced and not having agency. So that's sort of how it started. And in the book, the stories are chronological, even though they're not related to each other. Well, it's also interesting because I was kind of looking for these stories to read and I couldn't find them. So I don't want to say that I invented the genre because I probably didn't, but I call it feminist shtetl horror.
I crack up every time I hear that.
Well, and as I told you earlier, there are certain groups of women, when I say that, they laugh because it's redundant.
Yeah, it is.
But so I was really looking for this world, to explore this world that I don't feel is explored enough.
Yeah.
But from my point of view, and it probably also was the result of years of facing restrictions on my singing as an artist, especially in an ensemble all with men who are not facing any restrictions, of course.
Yeah.
So I think that this was all my response to the idea of being silenced.
Yeah. What is that law called? Kol isha? Is that it?
Yeah.
Kol isha, where women are not allowed to sing in a synagogue.
Well, it's not just in the synagogue. It's, Orthodox men can't listen to a woman singing. It's not so different from the whole idea of covering the head, because so we don't give them lewd thought. Again, looking at it from the point of view of now, it's sort of like, so the responsibility for, not making you attack a woman is the woman's responsibility, and not just, you're just not doing it. So, and it's not exclusive to Jewish culture. I mean, literally in every culture, you can find a variation of this. And I gave a lecture last year at a Yiddish conference in Sweden about the history. And when I was researching it, I'm going back to ancient Greece and the restrictions placed on women's voices. And literally in almost every culture, I found this.
Wow. That's amazing. So so what's next for you?
Well, my publishers asked the same thing. I'm noodling. I had a friend in Hollywood, a wonderful screenwriter, and I asked him what his writing process was, and he said, if it takes me a month to write something, it's 3 weeks of thinking and then 1 week of just setting down my thoughts. So yeah, I'm in the 3 week, although it's taking a lot longer than 3 weeks. But I have my next idea, and it's working its way out of my brain.
Well, I look forward to hearing what that idea is. And on that note, thank you, Elizabeth, for coming on and talking to me. I think you're such an intelligent and talented person. It's beyond my scope of imagination to be that phenomenal. So thank you so much. And I hope you come on again.
I hope so too. And I hope to find myself in Windsor sooner rather than later.
Oh, I know. Well, you are coming in August.
Yeah. That's a
Well,
really,
to Detroit, which is just across the river from us.
I know, well, it's just across the river.
Yeah. So what are you doing in August?
This is actually something I'm very excited about. And I know because I see what most people don't see, which is all of the labor that Yale puts into projects before they come to fruition. The Stroms come from Stoliner Hasidim, and there's a rich history of Stoliner Hasidim, also related to Yale's family in Detroit. And there's a former synagogue in downtown Detroit that the Stoliners not only built, but that his dad and uncle remembered laying the floors when they were children. And today it's a Baptist church. And one year we were in Detroit and we drove past and we met and we're talking to the pastor, and the deacon came out and they said, oh yeah, you know, we noticed there's like a big baptismal font in the basement, and meaning a mikveh. And I was like, yeah, it actually kind of is a baptismal font, sure. So Gail stayed in touch with him, and he had the idea of producing a concert of gospel and gospel music from their choir and the Stoliner music from that used to ring out in those rafters. And I believe the concert is called Hallelujah's in the House. And it will be musicians from Detroit, both from the church now, from our friends who will be joining us, including some amazing, renowned local musicians like guitarist Spencer Bearfield. And we'll do a concert of gospel music, of klezmer music, and then of course we'll play together.
Oh,
So
that's so exciting.
I'm really excited, and I know how much it means to Yale to bring this music that he's been such a guardian and proponent of, not just klezmer in general, but specifically the Stoliner beautiful melodies, and to bring them back into this space and breathe life back into the Stoliner memories there.
Oh, it's incredible. Okay, so 3 things about you. You're doing this concert in August.
August 25th.
August 25th, and you'll send me the information and
Okay.
I'll put it out when that's happening. You have this book coming out, or it's out already, right?
It is. It's just gone into its second printing, which is very gratifying.
The
And
Sweet
then in
Sweet
October, the audiobook will be out.
Yeah, so it's The Sweet Fragrance of Life and Other Horror Stories, which, believe me, is really scary. I'm not a big fan of horror, but I couldn't put the book down.
Oh,
And so and the other thing is you have your CD called The Wolf and the Lamb, right?
yes.
Is that it?
Yes, that's
Yes.
we've been really very fortunate in our label, which is Arc Music UK, Naxos World. So it's we've done a number of recordings with them now, and they're a wonderful, wonderful world folk label. So yeah, The Wolf and the Lamb, and that was recorded entirely in a former synagogue in the Czech Republic that is no longer a synagogue. It's a beautiful museum. And again, the idea was to go into that space and breathe the oxygen and share the oxygen in that beautiful resonant space.
Wow.
So I just wanted to mention also about The Sweet Fragrance of Life, because I always forget to mention it, that it's in English and in Yiddish. So it's a flip book. You can read it one way in English and you can turn it over the other way and read all of these if you are so inclined.
I know. I tried to read it in Yiddish and I went, no, I can't remember. I used to speak German because my grandfather actually came from the Czech Republic, Austrian border that you were talking about. And so his German was really Wonko. And then when he turned 80, he decided he was Polish. And none of us figured out why he thought he was Polish, but all of a sudden he would only speak Polish to us. And I went, oh my God, I can't handle it.
That's
But
great.
it's bizarre. But I mean, you have so much on your plate, and I'm so excited that people are going to get to know you the way I know you. So thank you for coming on, Elizabeth, and I hope you come on again soon.
Oh, it was a pleasure and quite an honor, Pam. Thank you.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
This podcast is brought to you by Unbreakable Bindings Publishing Company. Executive produced by Lori Baldassi, produced by Ryan Richardson, hosted by Pam Goldstein.